The number of minimum wage employees in Canada has doubled since 1998. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. Today, Yahoo, a search engine I have not heard from in a while, put out a piece highlighting that the number of minimum wage employees in Canada has doubled since 1998. That's pretty alarming. When we dive into the numbers a little bit, we see that the number of low-income earners was at 5.2% in 1998, and now, in 2018, it's 10.4%. Two key periods resulted in large spikes to the data. The first was around the 2008 recession, where people were being laid off in large numbers. Some individuals who may have had skill sets in certain areas had to accept any form of labor that would pay the bills. If you can't find work as an accountant, for example, because businesses are shutting down en masse, well, you still have to earn money. Maybe that results in you taking a minimum wage job and not working to your capacity. The second spike occurred when minimum wage increased in 2018. Ontario, BC, and Alberta increased what employees had to pay people at minimum. This is interesting because it sort of indicates that the increase was very attractive to citizens. In Ontario, for example, it went up to about $14 an hour. People who may have been unemployed or even gave up on looking for jobs saw that and they wanted a piece of it. They wanted to work again because the rates were deemed to be fair. And those two things in concoction with yearly increases in low-skill labor production resulted in this trend that we see here, the doubling effect over 2 decades. Another disturbing trend is evident within the data if you pry a little bit deeper into it. More minimum wage workers have post-secondary education today than they had in 1998. 1 in 3 people have a post-secondary education and they still work minimum wage jobs. In 1998, it was 1 in 4. So from 25% to 33% today. Plainly, you can see that the value of things like a university education has generally gone down over time. That is not true for every degree, obviously, but as a whole, 33% of minimum wage employees are university educated, and it begs the question, why bother with university in the first place if you are one of those people? Now, if we're going to be honest, there is a big difference between a degree in engineering and one in gender studies. The truth is, university really is a mechanism whose purpose is to make you more attractive to future employers. If you're not taking university courses for that reason, you may be going about it in the wrong way. Unfortunately, learning is secondary to those motives, and that's just how the system is set up. If the courses you are taking do not fulfill this goal, you really need to step back and analyze if the thousands of dollars you put in are worth it. University should be seen as more of an investment, especially if you want to make a good amount of money in today's economy. This is especially true with all of the other good alternatives like college and apprenticeships available to people. There are tremendous opportunities for high-paying jobs in those fields, but the seeming luster of a university education blinds people from seeing that. It's not an all-purpose golden ticket into the middle income earners anymore, and as we can see from the data, it becomes less so as time progresses. Maybe that's because everyone now has a university education and you need more to diversify yourself. More skill-based learning and things you can put on your resume of what you can actually do and bring to a company. Another disturbing trend is that most minimum wage employees work in the retail trade sector. They make up 32.7% of all the earners there, and that surpasses accommodation and food services. Retail is an industry that is quickly approaching its demise. In the early 2000s, online shopping and Amazon's next-day delivery were not things. Now, they are. Online sales have eaten large chunks out of retail, and far less staff are needed to manage an e-commerce shop versus a brick-and-mortar store, especially in the context of minimum wage labor. One thing mentioned in the article is that despite the increases to minimum wage, people still can't afford to live in premier areas like Toronto and Vancouver. To me, that makes sense, and it's the outcome that seems most likely here, given the astronomical costs associated with those places. And you have to ask yourself too, what really is minimum wage? And that's a question that politicians really have to start looking at. Do we need minimum wage to be something that you can live by yourself on? Right now, $14 an hour seems to make the cut. Obviously not in premier places, but in a lot of other places in Canada, it will suffice. It is 100% not enough to raise a family though. You might need 2 income earners making that minimum wage to make things work. Or do we just double the minimum wage so you can raise a family on it? These are fundamental societal questions that have to be answered for us to really dissect this question here. One thing that complicates the equation though is that on one hand, it's very easy for politicians to say, yes, I'm going to raise minimum wage to X amount of dollars and you are all going to benefit from it. It's an easy way to get votes. It's hard to argue against it because you come off as a Scrooge if you do, but as always, you have to look at the underlying effects of this, and I'm going to outline those now when we talk about the future. There are 2 things really happening here, and the first is the trend of AI wiping out low-skilled jobs. This is not just low-paying employment either, actually. Things like truck driving, which used to be a suitable means of earning a middle income, are at immediate risk also. Things that people used to do, robots are doing better and cheaper. There have been a lot of people pushing for things like a $20 minimum wage, but I'm not convinced it will be for the greater good. Yeah, it does sound nice, but what are the consequences? What happens when you push for higher minimum wages in today's environment? A company responds in 2 ways. First, they often keep the same payroll budget, but they're going to rejig the schedule to make up for the increased costs. So, for example, instead of having 10 people staffed on a particular day, the company will make do with about 9. The total pay to the employees remains the same. Each person employed will make a little bit more, but overall, there will be less people staffed. The people who do get lucky enough to have a shift end up carrying a larger burden because there's less people, and overall, the enterprise is less efficient. Of course, those few people make a little bit more money, but how about the people who were cut? There's also a second effect, which is really unique to our current time period. What you do by forcibly increasing minimum wages is you accelerate a corporation's desire to automate away all staff. If at $10 an hour, you spend $1 billion on payroll as a company, at $20 an hour, you would hypothetically need to spend $2 billion to maintain that same workforce. Now, what if that extra $1 billion is better invested in buying machinery? Or, if the machines are not ready yet, investing it into R&D to bring them about sooner. You can look at McDonald's, Walmart, so you have retail and food there, who are prime examples of that. Walking into your local Walmart now, half of the cashiers are gone. It's just self-checkout, and there's one person there who oversees 10 to 20 registers. Really, we're looking at the impending doom of low-skilled labor around the world, and it's a question of when it will happen. This comes to my second point now that I mentioned, and that's what we can do about it. Where is the thinking heading when it comes to minimum wage discussions? This trend makes something like a UBI almost mandatory and very attractive in terms of upholding society in the future, where things like AI have taken out large chunks of the job market. That, or people en masse, retrain and develop some in-demand skill sets. That seems kind of unlikely to me, so UBI is coming across as the premier answer here. Maybe it's not about raising minimum wage, but doing away with it altogether and finding a different alternative that's more future-proof. If you didn't know, UBI stands for a Universal Basic Income, and you can think of it as a monthly payment made to each and every citizen. The number that gets thrown around very commonly is $1,000. So every month, the government will give you $1,000, and it's meant to be a supplement. You can hypothetically live off that. If your standard of living is very low, you have the cheapest place in the cheapest area, and you live off ramen noodles, but it serves as a common baseline to keep all the residents of a country afloat at the bare minimum, and there's been some projections that show it won't be the most expensive thing ever done in the history of a country, because first of all, something like a UBI will replace all other social securities. So there'd be no more spending on employment insurance and benefits and whatnot, because the UBI is supposed to encompass all of that in one payment. So you'll save money on all those social services and just focus on the UBI, and everybody gets UBI. You can be rich, poor, middle class, you'll still get it. So it should be able to get a lot of people behind it. Everyone benefits, whether you're rich or you're poor, and as I mentioned, gives you that baseline to be able to live. It should scale with inflation, obviously, and people are even suggesting creating a new tax for companies who use AI. Seemingly, those would be very efficient machines who save the company a lot of money. So, as a result, this new tax will take some of that and charge them for that convenience and ease of access. The money will then go into funding the UBI and allowing people to live comfortably thanks to the miracle of technology. And it sounds really good to me. The UBI isn't supposed to be the answer to all your problems because, as you've seen here, right now, the projections are about $12,000 a year. That's actually lower than minimum wage, so you'll probably have to find a way to make money on the side. Maybe that entails going to your local restaurant and picking up a shift here and there, starting up a hobby that you can get paid for, or even going back to school, getting re-educated, or opening up a business. There's a lot of ways to make money, and because you'll have this UBI as a safety net, the risk of you going completely homeless is not really there. You'll be able to take more risk, and overall, it seems like the direction we should be heading in. Even if not the UBI approach, it's a good place to start a discussion, because as we've seen, the whole debate about minimum wage, in my eyes, is outdated. It's not the answer anymore, and you can't go into the future still thinking about it, because the more you push for that, the more companies are going to replace you, and when you accelerate that timeline, because it's going to happen one way or another, with the increase or without, but by pushing it higher, you incentivize companies to get rid of you, and when that happens, what do? Do we let society fall apart? Because as we've seen from the numbers, more and more people, unfortunately, are relying on minimum wage jobs to live a lifestyle. We can't be having that anymore because of these alarming trends, and it really is worrisome. Governments have to really crack this down, because if we don't, we can easily be looking at a tenth of our society completely unemployable. The drain that would have on our country as a whole, it would cripple our social systems, and at the same time, probably bring our country into the ground. So, we better start trying to find ways to solve that, and now is as good a time as any. So, that's about it for today. Thanks for joining me on the Perri platform. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share. You can also find me on Twitter at Perri Platform. I'll see you soon.